Dear students, welcome to this open course in Applied Language Skills. I am Shanavas Patupara, Assistant Professor of English, Government College, Mangada. First of all, I congratulate all of you and I appreciate your choice of because you have selected this open course that is Applied Language Skills, which is very relevant and which is going to be very useful for you in your career because we know it's about certain skills which we apply in which we apply in our day-to-day communication. Certain language skills, certain skills connected with language that we use in our day-to-day communication. So this is going to be very useful because in this course we'll be dealing with different skills associated with English. We'll be getting ourselves familiar with certain online resources, offline resources. We will also be familiar with the aspects of writing. So in that way, this is a very comprehensive course that is going to help you develop your language skills or sharpen your skills in language, and that will enhance your employability as a candidate. That will of course improve your potential as really a graduate. So therefore, I take this opportunity to appreciate you for your selection. And now let's come to the module in which today in this brief session I'll be talking about certain aspects of the first module. So we may just move to that one. That is, what is communication? And we know what communication is, and we talk about that that person has got an effective communication skill. Some people say that he doesn't have a communication skill. Sometimes we say that idea is not properly communicated. So we know what it actually means, communication, right? If I speak something and if you're able to understand, if you're able to respond to my speech, I can say both of us have this communication, right? A communication takes place. Suppose I speak about this open course with you, and if you're able to follow my open course, if you're able to understand my voice, it means there is a communication taking place, happening between you and me, right? So that is what communication skill is all about. So let us maybe when we want to define what communication is, we can actually say communication is an exchange of ideas, feelings, or meaning between two or more persons. So in this operation theater, what we find, there's a communication between the medical workers, maybe among doctors, right? So it may be an exchange of ideas. I give my idea to you, you are able to receive that, and you give your idea. So there's an exchange of ideas. Perhaps there is an exchange of feelings, happiness, sorrow, whatever, meaning, whatever it is. When two persons or more than two persons, when they communicate, when they talk, when they exchange ideas, feelings, or sometimes some other messages, they can be called communication, right? So in that sense, I don't know whether this slide is clear to you, but let me read. Communication is an activity of conveying things. Okay, we convey our feelings, we convey our ideas, we convey our need. That is communication. For example, we feel hungry at home, and we tell our mother, I want food. I would like to have a cup of tea sometimes when we feel thirsty. That actually what is happening is we are conveying our need because we feel hunger inside our stomach, right? So communication has been derived from the word communis, that means to share. Okay, so from that the word communication has come. And now, in the words of Lewis, communication is a sum of all the things one person does when he wants to create an understanding in the minds of the another. So all these things can be communication. Remember, we will talk about that communication may not be always in the form of words. അല്ലെ വാക്കുകൾ ഉപയോഗിച്ച് മാത്രമാവണമെന്നില്ല. കമ്മ്യൂണിക്കേഷൻ ക്യാൻ ഓൾസോ ബി യൂസിങ് gestures. Communication can also be in other forms, like perhaps even my dress communicates, perhaps my hairstyle may communicate in some context, right? So anything, that a person does to create an understanding in the mind of another person can be communication. Okay. That means communication involves what you can say systematic and continuous process of telling, listening, and understanding. Okay, these three things are there in communication. So we can say that communication is defined as giving, receiving, or exchanging information. So it can be giving information to someone, or we are receiving information from someone, or we are just exchanging information each other, one another. That can be communication, or sometimes it can be just sharing of opinions, sharing of ideas by writing, speech, or visual means. Okay, maybe I show you a picture and I try to communicate an idea. That is also communication. I speak and you understand the ideas related to communication that we speak now. That is also communication, right? You talk to me something about my class or whatever. That is also a kind of communication, right? So so what is the point is that that the other person should be able to understand what I say. Suppose I speak in German language or in French language, the same thing about what communication is, all those things. You are not able to follow German or French or Chinese. Then can we say there is a communication between us? No, there is no communication between us because you haven't understood what I have told you, because maybe because it's a different language, right? Or you speak to me in any other language that I do not know. There is no communication there between us, because again the problem is that I cannot accept, I cannot understand what you are telling me, right? So this is thing you have to keep in mind. Now we come to the process of communication. Actually, what's happening inside in the process of this communication, right? See, we can say, like, let me tell you one thing. Actually, there are two processes which are taking place. One is encoding, and the other one is decoding. Okay, encoding means, for example, let me give you the example. I feel hungry. I feel hungry. Then I want to communicate to my mother that I feel hungry. So how do I do that? I use a language. Say I tell my mother, ma'am, I'm hungry. Right, I'm hungry. So how do I say this? My hunger. Hunger is a special type of irritation or restlessness. A kind of feeling that I have inside my belly, a kind of butterflying effect sometimes that I feel it in my stomach, right? So that is being coded into, I made it as a code saying that hunger. So I tell my mother I am hungry. So I use the word I am hungry. That is, I use the channel that is English. I have encoded it in English channel and I give it to my mother. And my mother receives it in the form of a code, right? So mother decodes it. That means if my mother is able to understand English, she would understand, oh, what he means is this, the kind of feeling that he has inside his stomach when there is no food inside, right? So that is called hunger. So mother immediately understands, and then she speak to me back saying, okay, son, I'm ready to give you food. Okay, I'll give you food. So that willingness is, again, her willingness is coded in the letters in the sentence, I'll give you food, right? And that is communicated back to me, the sender. Okay, sender, sender. Okay, so what happens? I receive that. So this is a two communication, remember, is always a two-way process. That means I communicate something to another person, second person, and that person responds to me, right? I receive the response, then there is a communication. I speak to you, you listen to me, and then you communicate back to me saying yes sir, or you just nod your head, whatever may be, it shows that there is a communication taking place between a teacher and the student, right? So this is the process of communication. And now let's look at this, type. Now let's look at types of communication. One is verbal communication, the other one is non-verbal communication. So what we mean by verbal communication? So verbal communication means, for example, I talk to you something and you are able to understand. Then there is a verbal communication. Or suppose I send a letter to you, I write an email to you, and you are receiving it and you are giving me a reply. There is a communication taking place. Again, that is verbal. Or I sent a message via WhatsApp, and you are able to read and understand that WhatsApp message. Then it's called a verbal communication. So remember, verbal communication is about using language for communication, right? Whereas there is non-verbal communication. See, I told you already that communication may not always be, need not be with the help of language. Even without using language, we can communicate. Gestures, for example, when we talk about gestures, or maybe our eyes or our facial expression, dressing, all these things may communicate something, communicate an idea, meaning, message, whatever, right? So it is possible to communicate with the help of gestures, okay, our body movements, the way we walk, sit, stand, the actions that I perform with the help of my palms, or even the way I look, okay, the way I appear in my face, facial expression, all these things can communicate ideas, what to say, messages, etc. So that is an example for non-verbal communication. Suppose you send an emoji via WhatsApp. Again, that is also an example for non-verbal communication, right? So this is the next point you have to understand: verbal communication versus non-verbal communication, right? And now let's look at the last point of today's class, that is communication barriers. So what is communication barriers? See, there are a lot of factors which may sometimes stand in the way of getting an idea put across, getting an idea communicated to another person, right? We can sometimes broadly classify them as language barriers, psychological barriers, physical barriers. It can be attitude barriers. It can be perception barriers. Okay, that's one point is repeated. Okay, so it can be of many types. So let's look at each one separately. So language barriers and all. See, to be very precise, let's look at this and then we can come to the next point. That is, language barriers means, one thing I told you already, that suppose I speak to you in German or French or Chinese language or Japanese language, you are not able to understand that. Then we can say there is a barrier of communication. Or you speak to me in any language, in an alien tongue, in a foreign language that I cannot understand. Then there is a barrier between us. There is a breaking wall coming up between me and you in communicating our ideas. So that is one barrier, language. Or suppose a person is very proficient in a language, whereas the other person is just an ordinary man. And then I speak in a high sounding rhetorical language. The other person may not be able to understand. Sometimes people usually make fun of the language used by Sashi Tharoor, because the kind of words that he uses is really astounding. Sometimes ordinary people may find it difficult to follow. Okay, so that's an example again for language barrier. Okay, sometimes language barrier, we have pronunciation. For example, we know how the foreigners actually speak English. They use RP English, received pronunciation, and American English is again different. The language used in the rural areas of Australia, New Zealand are again further different. So what we find is that there are differences. For example, a person from India, maybe he speaks in a kind of English which is more connected to his own mother tongue. So because of the pronunciation, because of the the complexity of the language used, or the technical words, highly technical jargons used by the speaker, we may fail to understand. For example, doctors, when they talk among themselves, they may use a lot of medical terms which an ordinary person may not understand. For example, two lawyers, when they meet, they may use a lot of Latinate expressions which are used in law, habeas corpus, and things like that. Ordinary persons may not be able to understand that. Then there is a language barrier, right? Then psychological barriers. Again, psychological barriers means, for example, if a person is very much stressed, anxious, excited, he will not be able to communicate his idea. For example, you have got the first prize, okay, or first rank, or a gold medal, or something, or you have won a lottery. Immediately you rush to your house and you want to meet your mom and tell her about this. Sometimes you will not be, because of that excitement, you will not be able to tell her what you have got. Or if you are deeply saddened because of that, you met with an accident or something, you are so frightened, you are so scary that sometimes you will not be able to convey that message to that person. It can happen sometimes, right? Or maybe because you are mentally disturbed because of some other problems, again you will not be able to communicate. So this is what we call psychological barriers. Then physical barriers, basically there are a lot of things. Physical barriers can sometimes be the place in which we sit. For example, I take this online class in a situation when there are a lot of outside noises. Then what happens is, I may not be able to speak better, right? So that is an example for physical barrier. Sometimes you may see that in children are playing outside this room, so they create sometimes noises, and that may be a problem, right? So that may be a physical. If it is too much, it may be a barrier, right? Or it may be a barrier, like these kind of things. Okay. Then attitude barriers. For example, a teacher comes to our class, and we are not in a position to listen to that teacher because we feel that he's actually a stupid fellow, an insincere fellow. We don't want to listen to him. Whatever he says are nothing but blunders. So when we have such an attitude, we will never care to listen to him. Okay, then there comes the problem of attitude barriers. And perception barriers are also like that. The way we understand one thing may be different from the way the speaker may have intended it. Okay, intentionally, there may be sometimes I say one sentence in one sense, but the readers, so I mean the listeners may have taken it in any other sense. So there is a problem of perception that may hinder the communication barrier, because I say something and you take it in I say something positive and you take it in a negative tone, a negative sense. Then we can say there is a barrier of perception there, right? So like this, there are a few communication barriers we have got in communication while we are in communication. So these are some of the points which I have already explained: the use of jargons, emotional barriers, the lack of attention, interest, distractions. That I've already told you about that. It is not the irrelevance; it is irrelevance to the receiver. Suppose we don't respect a person, we don't care him at all, then we may feel not interested to talk to him. I mean, to listen to him, etc. Distractions, for example, we are listening in a class and suddenly we find an helicopter is landing there on the college ground. Immediately our attention will be drawn to it, right? So we may lose our interest in this one, right? And differences in perception, already told you. Physical disabilities, of course, that's a point we have to discuss. Physically, for example, if a person is not able to hear properly, then he will have the problem of getting idea communicated properly, right? When we talk to him, he may not be able to listen it properly, okay? So there may be physical disabilities as well. Okay, physical barriers. Okay. Then physical barriers means, for example, using gestures. For example, in non-verbal communication, we use gestures. For example, if the other person is not able to see our gestures or our general body language, etc., then communication becomes rather ineffective, right? For example, we make a telephone call or a text message. In text message, the problem is that The other person may not know in what context it was written. The text message was actually typed. Okay, whether we have meant it positively or negatively, we don't know. Sometimes in WhatsApp nowadays, we have this advantage of, we use emojis now because we just want to convey what idea we actually mean, right? But normally, unless we use such emojis and all, a text message may be taken positively or negatively. It can be wrongly interpreted, it can be rightly understood. So that also becomes a physical barrier to this one. A phone call sometimes can be like that, because if the line is not clear, if you do not understand whether he speaks ironically or not over the phone, everything may contribute to the barriers to non-verbal communication, right? So that is also a point you may understand. So language differences, I already told you. Language difference means, for example, it may be the pronunciation or it may be a different language that the other person is using. So there is a problem of communication barrier. Then expectation and prejudices. That can lead to something, right? Because when a person speaks something correctly, we may feel that that person is absolutely telling foolish things. Then we won't listen to him, right? So that can be a problem. Then cultural differences. We know that certain words have different meanings in different cultures, so it can lead to misunderstanding. For example, the word for tapioca, what we use in in Malappuram region, is different from what we use in Trivandrum side. It's having a derogative, negative connotation in Trivandrum side. So what happens is, when we use that word, it becomes a misunderstanding of meaning. So idea will fail to communicate itself, right? So cultural differences can also be there. So this is all about today's session. So we talked about what communication is, type of communication, the process of communication, and barriers of communication. Thank you.